none, it is introduced.
Madam Chair, can I make a point of order?
Sure.
So obviously the individual submission deadline passed yesterday, but because this is an exempt committee, we can still have bills introduced here. So I just wanted members who are new to know that. Thank you, Madam Chair. Like Senator Thomas, yes.
Senator Falscado.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I have a bill introduction, RS 1108, and it is a bill pertaining to youth in our juvenile justice systems.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, it is introduced. Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got a bill request. It's RS 1098. It is allowing for members of the Wildlife and Parks Commission to submit rules and regs changes.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, it is introduced. Any other bill introductions? I have one. It is on behalf of Representative Will Carpenter, and it has to deal with hunting, and it is 25 RS 0163. If there's any questions, I do not know. Seeing none is introduced. Anybody from the audience need to have a bill introduction? Seeing none, that is it for bill introductions. We're going to go on to a briefing from Secretary of State Scott Schwab over Kansas elections. We do have a tight schedule to accommodate, so if you want to go ahead, Secretary Scott Schwab, and give your presentation. Everybody in the S drive, there is his testimony if you have any questions, and then we'll make sure that you're out of here in time for your next commitment.
Thank you. Am I on here? The light's on. Well, that's what my mom says about me on a regular basis. So, well, can you hear me? People online may not be, but real quick, couple things. One, I like that you call me Secretary Scott. So you guys don't know, she's like my political younger sister. We went to the same elementary, junior high, high school, college, and both ran for office directly out of college, to which she says,
Did you win?
I did not. She did. That being said, also, we'll go quick. As my mom says, I speak 80 words a minute with gusts up to 120. Real quick, so I told you just a little bit about me, and I've been a House member for years, never had the opportunity to serve in the Senate. Well, actually, I did. I just didn't want to do it. No offense. But I took office in 2019 as Secretary of State and got reelected in 2022 and was sworn in again in 2023. Secretary of State, among other things, I am the Chief Election Officer, which normally provides more guidance than mandates. The feds and you all do most of the mandates, and we carry those out and make sure they're aware of what's being said. There are 4 counties that I do have direct authority over, and those are the 4 largest, which would be Johnson, Wyandotte, Shawnee, which is where you are now, and of course, Sedgwick. Couple things on election administration. The other 104, those are just those 4. The other 104 county clerks, they are subject to the authority of their county commission because they are elected, and so they're also subject to their electors. They do take our guidance because they don't want to get sued, but again, there is a lot of autonomy on those levels. So we partner together and do our best to have a good working relationship, which we have so far for 7 years. As it relates to election laws, most of which it's kind of a hybrid of federal and state. With the feds, obviously there's a Voting Rights Act of 65, UACAVA from 1968, which accommodates our military and overseas personnel. Then the NVRA in 1993, which is voter registration. And just so you know, be paying attention to the NVRA. There's a lot of outdated language. In 1993, most voter registration was done by paper and pen. Now, almost all our voter registration is done through computer systems. And so the Congress is looking at updating that. And so just be aware of that. So far, we've had no concerns with some of the suggestions that are coming down with, but you guys know how that works. Once it's out of committee, you never know what could happen. So, and then also HAVA, which was Help the America Vote Act, which was a result of the almost tie election between Bush and Gore, Bush and Gore. And actually, one of my predecessors, then Secretary of State Ron Thornburg, was president of the National Association of Secretaries of State, and he was the one who almost completely wrote that law with Congress. And we do like that law, so it's been very helpful. As it relates to state, in 2011, we passed the SAFE Act when I was chair of the Elections Committee in the House. That was the introduction of voter ID and proof of citizenship. And proof of citizenship was lost after the appellate court said that it's unconstitutional, and the U.S. Supreme Court did not take it up in 2020. And then we expanded in, my wife says either leave them on or take them off. We expanded the additional election security in 2022 with making sure tabulators were not connected to the internet, which they weren't in Kansas, but it was legal to do it. And so after Bush v. Gore, who's calling me? You can call me later. After Bush v. Gore, the media in Florida was frustrated with Katherine Harris that they were not reporting results fast enough. So they connected their tabulators to the Secretary of State's system so that they can get real-time results. We don't do that. We don't want to do that. And thanks to you all, we prevented that in statute so it wouldn't happen later. So that's kind of some of the stuff we have going on that you've done in the past. And then last year, we've had 3 elections in 1 year, which is rare. We had the presidential preference primary. We asked for $500,000 to help fund that. We came in almost half of that simply because by then, at the time, they assumed the nominees were pretty much chosen and voter turnout was incredibly low. So whatever leftover monies we returned back to the state general fund. And so, you know, Biden received 83.6, and then Trump got 75% of the vote in that. And again, those really don't matter a whole lot because the parties can choose on their own whether or not how much that weighs. And so my advice going forward is don't waste your money on that because it really doesn't change the needle on anything. And as you can tell, it doesn't guarantee people come to your state, doesn't guarantee you're going to have good voter turnout or participation. So primary election, we had 16% turnout. In 2024, it's pretty low. 2022, obviously, was significantly higher with a constitutional amendment that was rather controversial on the ballot. As for the general election, it was pretty historical. We had 1.3 million people cast a ballot in Kansas. Overwhelmingly, people are voting earlier, more and more. I think that's because they assume if they vote, they'll get less text messages, which there is some logic to that. And then we did last year hit for the first time over 2 million registered voters in the state of Kansas. And in a state of 3.1 million, that includes minors, we're doing pretty good on voter registration in our state. So, legislative agenda. There's one thing we want to do is increase penalties for threats to election workers. This is becoming a thing, and obviously we don't have statistics because they don't report crimes to us or report to their local sheriff's office. We do hear anecdotal stories, but it's scary when you can be as young as 16 and be an election poll worker, and for someone who's 60 or 55 to threaten a 16-year-old, it's really going to hinder our recruitment process if those rumors get out that young folks or, you know, a 35-year-old assaulting or trying to attack a 78-year-old. You know, we just want to make sure that we really make sure a message from the state that this behavior is not going to be tolerated. We want to increase right now, the way the statute says is if there's an obituary in the paper, we can remove them for the voter rolls. But more and more obits are being done online at the funeral home and not necessarily in a published paper. So it's easily verifiable, but that person is no longer, as my dad would say, his assumed room temperature. So if that's the case, we want to make sure we are pulling them off the voter rolls. And so we do it now, but we'd really like it in statute in case someone tries to sue us and say you can't do that because people like to sue us all the time. And then Dropbox Regulatory Authority. It's looking like this legislature, once again, is going to take a run at eliminating the 3-day waiting period. That's y'all's decision. We've been neutral on the position. But if you're going to do that, please let us keep the drop boxes at the county level. Again, no private entity or association can have drop boxes. That's against the law. Only a county has. We just want to set a standard for security on those boxes. And then that way, if it's getting close to 7 o'clock or it's election day morning, like, oh my gosh, I forgot to fill out my ballot. Or if you're like me with a college college kid that's not always most attentive, you can say, hey, you need to come home and cast your ballot, but you can just run it down to the county and put it in the drop box. If you only give them an option of U.S. mail and they're trying to get it there on the election day, you're now have a negative 1 day waiting period. So being as efficient as I can, Madam Chair, I will stand for questions.
Committee questions? Senator Falscadeau.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Secretary Scott Schwab, we served together in the House.
Sure did.
And we were on the Elections Committee at that time. And so when we talk about Senate Bill 4, eliminating the 3-day grace period. So is there anything currently in place for those who are on a permanent advance ballot? I'm talking about those people with disabilities that are wheelchair bound and they've got the doctor's statement saying that they are disabled. So do we have any measure in there to make sure they get their ballots on time and mailed back with the United States Postal Service issue?
They would be, from what my understanding of the bill is, they'd be subject the same as everybody else. So whether or not you want to spend a special provision for them, that's a policy decision for y'all.
Committee, further questions? Senator Gossage.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Secretary. So my question is, we know with the drop boxes, but they would still have to have it there by 7 o'clock, correct?
In your bill, correct.
Okay. But currently,
Currently, yeah, it's our recommendation that they pick them up and lock them at 7 o'clock. But again, that's why we need the regulatory authority because, like I said earlier, a lot of these counties are subject to their county commission.
okay, gotcha. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, and thank you, Secretary, for being here. We've talked a bit about election security, and I understand that some of the funding for that is separate from the HAVA funds because it can come through the Emergency Management Association. I don't know if any of those dollars have reached the state.
So, and that's all in a flux because we don't know what the feds are going to do with CISA. We did get some emergency management funds through CISA, and that was actually helpful because that didn't require a match on your part, whereas the HAVA funds did. And I appreciate you saying that because one of the things we did with our HAVA money, I was hoping, we budgeted $1 million, but it was over $2 million. We contracted with Connie Schmidt. She's a nationally recognized county election official. She leads red, white, and blue. And she has gone from region to region, county to county to say, how do you secure your equipment? What's your process? And basically did a procedural audit and then came up with recommendations of what folks did. And I said, you guys are going to do this. But I didn't want to put an unfunded mandate on the county. So we ended up releasing over $2 million funds to make sure that, in some situations, some of their equipment was stored in the supply closet. So anybody in that courthouse could be going in there and there was no security badge or anything. So we made sure we put some basic security measures in there so not everybody's messing with election equipment because we really frown upon that.
I could follow up. Yeah. So I appreciate that, but the question that the committee had on a bill had actually to do with funding and if funding through emergency management can go directly to local units of government and then it wouldn't go through necessarily the Secretary of State's office. So just to make sure that if such funding is made available, and currently, grants require a 3% expenditure on election security. I'd want to make sure that anything we do is not interrupting with.
Yeah, I do not know of a situation where emergency management goes directly to the county. They've always gone through our office, but let us talk to some of our federal folks to see if there's an exception to that, and I'll have my team get back with you and the entire committee on that so you're all aware.
Would appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thank you. If you could have your team send it to Angela, your response back, that would be great.
Thank you.
Senator Clifford.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. When Senate Bill 321 was heard back in 23 to set this up, I don't expect you to remember the testimony, but
I don't remember the bill numbers. I know subject matter.
but your office testified neutral. There was a Jewish citizen who said, we can't vote on the Sabbath, so we would appreciate this bill because it would allow some flexibility.
What did the bill do again? I'm sorry.
It would set up the presidential preference.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that bill. I didn't expect you to remember that, but I have a computer here. But my feeling, and I voted for it because I thought it would bring candidates to Kansas, which, I mean, Huckabee came back in 2015. He was the only one who came out in western Kansas. And I thought we'd be able to drive turnout. Obviously, that's not the way it worked out, but in the era maybe of contested primaries, we might still get people to Kansas. I want us to be relevant. But I wonder, what's the national appetite for shifting our primary earlier, not a presidential preference primary, but our own primary, because, it impacts us candidates having a quick turn to the general. So has that been discussed? Is there an appetite on either side of the aisle for any movement of our primary?
That's a question for you all to decide. Nationally, they're not, especially on the political side, they're not going to tell us what to do. We have autonomy. The best example of federalism is our election system. I will say when you start messing with deadlines, it starts pushing everything else back. So our clerks, when they look at that calendar in August and say, I think in 2026, I think the primary is August 6th or August 5th, I can't remember, it's somewhere around there. They start saying, okay, well, they start counting backwards, like this is the last day to request of early in-person voting. This is the last day. And they work every day back going to sometimes as early as January. If you end up moving that back a month, you're actually pushing that starting into the previous year when clerks are trying to wrap up their business for the county. So I would just talk to your local election officials about how that's going to affect their day-to-day, because most of our clerks, except for 4 counties, not only do they do elections every day, sometimes multiple elections because they have all these school bond elections and whatnot, they're also dealing with tax notices at the same time they're trying to administer an election. So sometimes they have a staff of 3. So I would have those conversations with them.
Follow up, Madam Chair. Thank you. Yeah, as a former county commissioner, I get it. It's pretty obvious that other states do it much earlier than we, but it's a quick turn to the general for those of us who are maybe going to be on the ballot in the future, such as yourself.
Allegedly.
So
June next year is a long way away.
it'll be here in no time. So, but I appreciate your answer. I sympathize with the clerks, and I think you really, and I'd like to compliment you, Ms. Secretary. You have enabled the clerks to do their job, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you. That means a
Madam Chair.
ton because this state doesn't run on the election side without them.
Committee, further questions? Senator Falscato.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Secretary, I actually know Election Day because periodically it falls on August 5th, my birthday. So I'm like, I'm going to have a really good birthday or a really bad one. Thank you.
Either way, happy birthday.
I do have 2 questions. First, for drop boxes. I've never used one, so this is brand new territory for me. Are the ballots scanned so they know that it was in a drop box compared to being handed to the, if I wanted to take it to a polling place on Election Day, is it scanned so you know it was in a drop box?
Yeah, the counties have different way of segregating those, but yeah, the drop box is better because, well, there's plus and minuses on both. With the drop box, there's cameras, and to empty that box, it takes 2 people that have taken an oath to Kansas law of 2 different parties, and they make sure it's locked, secure, and they have to drive together to take those to be tabulated. When they bring it in into a polling place, It's normally, there's almost like a drop box in there, they put it in. And how that county decides to determine whether it was at that polling place or whether it was at a drop box, that's up to the county to decide how they keep those tallies. At the end of every election, we send out a survey of questions of data we want, and we have to constantly ask those clerks to get that data to us. But they got other things going on, and we understand that. But that's information we try to get to provide, okay, do we need a change in policy? And so we're still collecting those, and we'll have more of that aggregated for you probably early next year.
Is it on your website to know, or maybe you could get back to us with your report on the utilization of drop boxes? How many voters utilized it? And is it maybe more prevalent in Shawnee County compared to Gove County?
Yeah, I would guarantee you it's more used in the larger counties and then the more rural counties. So that would be a survey question we would ask. So I don't know. Let me see what counties actually track that. I can at least give you some anecdotal from the counties that do, but it won't be consistent across all 105.
Okay. I have one more, and then I'll go to Senator Murphy. The second question, you talked about purging voter rolls. What if, I'm going to give a hypothetical here. What if somebody was a registered voter in Barton, but then they passed away in another county? Great Bend Tribune probably isn't going to have it in their newspaper. Do you deal with those situations?
We do on a regular basis, and that's why we call it list maintenance, because it's not like one day we highlight a bunch of emails and hit delete like you guys do when you have a controversial issue, or at least I did. But what we do is, as we find those, we chase them down or give it to the county and say, hey, where was this person registered? And then we go to that county and ask them to take them off the list. And just so you know, there's only a handful of ways we can legally remove somebody from the voter registration list. Felon, passed away, requested, relocated out of state, and then also we've created another one a few years ago, which is really helpful. Thank you, Senator Francisco, for being one of the few Democrats who understand this issue, is that what happens is oftentimes we have had no activity on a voter. So what we do is the clerk will send them a notice. And if 4 years goes by and they haven't done any election activity, which means didn't update their information, didn't sign a petition, didn't ask for a ballot, even if they didn't turn it in, just nothing. 4 years later, which is a total span of 8 years, 2 presidential elections, we can remove them from the voter rolls. As she said, she works as a poll worker in Lawrence and sees people's names at the University of Kansas she went to school with in the dorm still. Probably not there anymore.
I can understand at Fort Hays, we used to always get out the vote and to get people to register to vote, and they would register with their dorm address. And
You can do it.
yep. Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Secretary. What's the standard on, you mentioned security on the lockbox. Is there a standard for that, or is that sort of up to each
Yeah, so
county?
it's like Pirates of the Caribbean right now. They're just guidelines, really. We'd really like them to be rules in a code. Most counties follow it. I don't know if they always will. We want them bolted down to concrete where it can be monitored by the county, and it is on county property. We don't want to put it in front of a school. We don't want to put it in front of a church. It is on county property and is monitored by a camera. And some counties can't afford the camera, so they just choose not to do the drop box. And then another portion is sometimes they have sort of like a mail slot. So imagine sort of like your safety deposit box at the bank. You open it up, you put it in, and it goes inside the building itself. We want to be able to have standards for that too, because we have a county that right now, they have one, but it goes into the treasurer's office. Okay, we just want to put some standards on that to say, hey, no one from the treasurer's office can, during this time period, can open that up until the clerk clears all the ballots first, because the treasurer should be handling ballots.
Very good, thank you.
Committee, further questions? Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a quick question, and just curious, what percentage do we know of counties use the machines as opposed to hand counting or hand ballot?
No counties do hand counting. Now every county does have paper ballot verification, but all of them use some form of equipment to tabulate.
Great, thank you.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. In fact, Help America Vote Act, I did one of my research papers when I was working on my master's, and there were several polling places closed as a result of it because they didn't have electricity to their polling places. So it did have unintended consequences, but you said that not any county in Kansas, it's my understanding that Sherman County does. They are the only county that does hand count, but they.
We can verify that. Yeah, that's easily verifiable. But I'll just say, so after HAVA, there's a lot of things that changed, that all our voting equipment, because we're no longer on DREs, have battery backup. And so, and they're also required to have a certain percentage of backup in their fleet in a polling place. So if a machine goes down, they could switch it out and go. So we haven't had, we've had power outages, but it hasn't hindered our election process.
Seeing no further questions, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Mr.
committee.
Secretary, for
Appreciate
being
it.
here.
And of course, Whitney and Clay are generally around to help you as well. They're stalwarts here. So thank you.
I feel like they're frequent flyers in our committee.
They do want to take a free trip.
That is it for today. Committee, just want to remind you that tomorrow we have the lottery coming, so be prepared if you have any questions for that. And we are adjourned. Thank you.